Welcome to Newsday on the BBC. I'm Mariko in Singapore. The headlines. US stock markets suffer their biggest one-day percentage fall since 1987 as the Trump administration issues new guidance on avoiding public spaces and unnecessary travel. The French president bans people from leaving their homes except for essential reasons from Tuesday, saying the country is engaged in a health war.
And I'm Kasia, Madera in London. Also coming up here on Newsday, work from home where possible and avoid non-essential contact with others. That's the message from Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson. And the search for a vaccine is continuing. We'll be hearing from the head of an international research team about their progress.
Live from our studios in Singapore and London. This is BBC World News. It's Newsday.
Good morning. It's 9 a.m. here in Singapore and 1 o'clock in London. And around the world, governments are introducing new measures and recommendations to fight the global coronavirus pandemic. On Tuesday, the European Union will discuss closing its borders to incoming travellers. In the UK, people are told to work from home and avoid congregating. In the United States, President Trump says a recession is possible. We'll have more on all of that in a moment, but first, here's the latest from the head of the World Health Organization.
All countries must take a comprehensive approach. But the most effective way to prevent infections and save lives is breaking the chains of transmission. And to do that, you must test and isolate. You cannot fight a fire blindfolded, and we cannot stop this pandemic if we don't know who is infected. We have a simple message for all countries: test, test, test. Test every suspected case. If they test positive, isolate them and find out who they have been in close contact with up to 2 days before they developed symptoms, and test those people too.
A strong message there. We will be bringing you up to date with the situation in France, in the UK and also in Spain. But we're going to start in the United States, where New York City is extremely quiet. Schools, bars, restaurants all shut as drastic steps are taken to contain this virus. President Trump said that there may be a recession in America, and Wall Street plunged further, suffering the second biggest percentage drop ever. The government has announced strict guidelines for Americans to follow over the next 15 days, including working from home. Nick Bryant reports.
We live in a world right now where so much looks familiar, but almost everything feels different. And on the Monday morning Staten Island ferry, these empty rows were a measure of community concern. These protective masks, a global badge of fear.
People are worried and we don't know what to do, and that makes us worry more.
I was just actually thinking this morning about how apocalyptic it felt. I was lying in bed and I was like, this is a movie. It can't be real.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Never seen it like this in my life. I've been living here all my life. Incredible.
On the New York subway system, social distancing would usually be impossible in the middle of the rush hour. But this morning it felt like a ghost train. This city of perpetual motion is shutting down. It's bars, it's restaurants, it's school system. And it's frightening for New Yorkers like Liz Santana.
Oh no, it's devastating what's happening right now. It's very emotional for a lot of service people to lose their jobs.
Times Square is normally the pulsing heart of Manhattan, bumper to bumper congested. But just about the only activity was on its dancing big screens. Images from a Chinese news channel with scenes that are now playing out here.
They call Times Square the crossroads of the world, but nobody wants to meet here anymore.
The nation's capital looked like a scene from some dystopian drama. And at the White House, the physical barriers that protect the president are now being augmented by medical checks on people going inside. And it's not just the health of the nation that's on Donald Trump's mind, but the economic fallout after another calamitous down the markets.
Thank you.
Which took yet another hit after he'd answered this question.
Is the U.S. economy heading into a recession?
Well, it may be. We're not thinking in terms of recession. We're thinking in terms of the virus. Once we stop, I think there's a tremendous pent-up demand, both in terms of the stock market and in terms of the economy. And once this goes away, once it goes through and we're done with it, I think you're going to see a tremendous surge.
US airlines are seeking a $50 billion government bailout, given so much of the world has been immobilized. But one sector of the American economy is experiencing a dramatic spike in sales. The queue here in Los Angeles was for guns. Nick Bryant, BBC News, New York.
Well, let's get more on that dramatic fall on the US markets overnight, the second biggest fall in history. Samir Hussain is in New York for us.
I think the problem is that investors are really in uncharted territory. You know, one person I was speaking with on the floor earlier today sort of said, well, look, you know, we've never seen anything like this, even compared to 2008, 2009. But at least then there was some idea of where this was going to hit in terms of the economy. But in this particular instance, absolutely every single part of the economy is being impacted. So there's no real area for investors to kind of hide or wait until this blows over. And that's the other issue, of course. We heard from the president that perhaps this could go on until at least August. Well, that also rattled investors because that is a long time to be dealing with that amount of uncertainty.
Well, thanks to Samira Hussain in a very, very quiet New York. Now let's turn to France, where the president there, Emmanuel Macron, says that the country is in a state of war against the virus. On Sunday, he did join people across France voting in municipal elections. But then in a TV address on Monday, he said that too many people had not been respecting measures introduced. He said that people should not leave home except for essential reasons from midday Tuesday, or they'd face punishment.
Toute infraction à ces règles. Any and all infractions to these rules will be penalized. I speak to you with much solemnity. Listen to the medical advice, which is stay at home and avoid unnecessary contacts. This is the most important. Tonight I'm imposing new regulations. There will be controls and limitations. But the best rule is the one that you should apply to yourselves as citizens. I call on your sense of civic duty and solidarity.
Well, the external borders of the European Union and also the wider group of nations that belong to the Schengen zone could be closed for up to 30 days. The head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, proposed the plan, which has not yet been confirmed by member states. She said that it would stop non-essential travel, but that returning EU citizens, workers who commute across borders, and also people delivering goods would be exempt. Vauxhall's parent company will shut all of its European manufacturing plants this week until at least the 27th of March. In a statement, the PSA Group said that it had seen a significant drop in demand and also disruption to supply chains. Other manufacturers such as Ford, Nissan, Fiat, Chrysler, they've all suspended work at factories in Spain and Italy due to the virus. A man who stockpiled nearly 18,000 bottles of hand sanitizer has given it all to charity, according to reports. Matt Colvin from Tennessee, who was the subject of a New York Times article, is being investigated for price gouging after he tried to sell the sanitizer for an inflated price on Amazon. The actor Idris Elba has announced that he has tested positive for coronavirus. The star, who's been isolated since he found out about his possible exposure to the virus, said on Twitter that actually he doesn't feel any symptoms. He feels okay. He'll be keeping us all updated about how he is doing. We wish him all the best.
Now to Spain, where the government has announced sweeping measures allowing it to take over private healthcare. The number of cases there has now risen to almost 9,500 and more than 300 people have died. Spain has declared a state of emergency, placing the country on partial lockdown. Damien Grammaticus has more.
This is Spain on a war footing, the military mobilised for this fight against the virus. instructing people to go back to their homes. Keep apart, police warn people in Madrid. Day one of a state of emergency. Those who don't have masks improvise. You're only meant to go out if you're heading to work or buying food.
My mom sent me some picture of the supermarket.
Like these Italian students, stuck here in Spain indefinitely as all flights to Italy have been grounded. But they think the lockdown is justified.
Do you think this is necessary, all of these measures? Absolutely necessary. It's the only way to can fight this situation.
To stop the virus spreading?
Stop the virus, yeah.
So this is now a European capital living under extraordinary measures. The buses run, but they're empty. The Prado Museum. Police scan their mobiles for the latest information, while teams try to disinfect the city. And Madrid's main train station is still working, but only for essential journeys. The risk from the virus is all around. Irene, a doctor, is trying to get back to her hospital urgently. She was studying in the USA but got a call saying they needed her back here. She arrived from New York this morning.
I guess this is an emergency and anything we can do to help, it's like what we have to do. So.
And this is why Spain's hospitals, a health system under severe stress. There's a desperate need to slow the pace at which people are being infected. This hospital on the edge of Madrid has set aside more than 100 beds for coronavirus patients in the past few days. They're not overwhelmed, but the problem they have, they say, is that they are already running low on stocks of safety equipment. And that means the medical staff are being put at risk. Alex, one of the nurses, tells me that the masks we're carrying are better than those the hospital staff are provided.
I think it is necessary that the government takes these measures. We are trying to stop a disease we don't understand. We see what some countries in Asia did. We think this is the best thing to do.
Meanwhile, those forced to stay at home are trying to make the most of it. An aerobics session laid on free for everyone stuck in one group of apartments, followed by a game of communal flat-bound bingo, keeping spirits up even as the country shuts down. From this evening, Spain is closing its borders. Only residents and Spanish citizens allowed to enter the country. Damien Grammaticus, BBC News, Madrid.
Well, here in the UK, the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has introduced stricter measures, saying that everyone here should avoid non-essential travel and contact with others. More than 1,500 people have tested positive for the virus in the UK, but scientists advising the government estimate that the actual number of cases is between 35 and 50,000. Well, here's the Prime Minister explaining why these new stricter measures are coming in now.
We are asking people to do something that is difficult and disruptive of their lives. And the right moment, as we've always said, is to do it when it is most effective, when we think it can make the biggest difference to slowing the spread of the disease, reducing the number of victims, reducing the number of fatalities.
Well, our political correspondent in Westminster, Chris Mason, gave more details about the government's new measures.
What's been quite striking, Kasia, today from a British perspective is the government here really cranking up the timeline it had set out for potential measures and fast-forwarding measures that many people, a matter of just a couple of days ago, thought might be a couple of weeks away. So the big change here in the UK today is this idea that if anyone in your household demonstrates symptoms such as a temperature or a persistent cough, then all of you have to self-isolate for 2 weeks to give time for the person who is displaying the symptoms to work through the virus, if indeed that is what they have, and for anyone else with them who is likely to catch it from them to also demonstrate those symptoms and potentially see the virus through themselves. So that's a big change, as is the expectation that those with underlying health conditions, and the government's published a whole list of them online in the last couple of hours, or those over 70 should go for significant social distancing. Perhaps not in all instances staying behind closed doors, but certainly keeping away from any unnecessary social contact. And when you step back from it, Kasia, the thing that really struck me today, for the second time in just a couple of days, is that I've just never seen a British Prime Minister in my lifetime, I'm 40 next month, say anything like the kind of thing we heard from Boris Johnson. And I think for anyone really in the UK context who wasn't around at the time of the Second World War, they would have never heard a British Prime Minister setting out those kind of measures for how they expect British people to respond.
Chris Mason speaking to Kasia a little earlier. You're watching Newsday on the BBC. Still to come on the programme. The best defence against COVID-19 is good old-fashioned soap. A chemistry professor tells us why.
Today we have closed the book on apartheid and that chapter.
More than 3,000 subway passengers were affected. Nausea, bleeding, headaches and a dimming of vision. All of this caused by an apparently organised attack.
The trophy itself is on the pedestal in the middle of the cabinet here. Now, this was an international trophy, and we understand now that the search for it has become an international search.
Above all, this was a triumph for the Christian Democrats of the West, offering reunification as quickly as possible, and that's what the voters wanted.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsday on the BBC. I'm Mariko in Singapore.
It's good to have you with us. I'm Kasia Madera in London. Our main story. US stock markets suffer their biggest one-day percentage fall since 1987 as the Trump administration issues new advice about avoiding public gatherings.
France's President Macron has ordered people to stay at home from Tuesday unless they're going to work or to buy provisions as the country engages in a health war. Let's now take a look at some front pages from around the world where the coronavirus is once again front and center. Let's start with the Financial Times, which is reporting on the continued market losses that we saw around the world because of the outbreak. Japan's Nikkei has now opened 3% lower this morning following that brutal day on Wall Street. The paper also reports that UEFA, that's the body governing European football, is now preparing to postpone the Euro 2020 Championship. The Japan Times is also running a front-page spread on the economic cost of the outbreak, and the paper reports that the country's central bank, the Bank of Japan, will aggressively buy risky assets and create a new one-year zero-rate loan program to offset market losses. The investors weren't too impressed by that announcement yesterday. And here in Singapore, the Business Times has a report on measures taken in neighbouring Malaysia. It writes that the country will now be on lockdown for 2 weeks. Starting on Wednesday, schools and most shops will be shut and only essential service agencies will operate. Kasia.
Well, many thanks, Mariko. The race is on around the world to develop a vaccine for coronavirus. The Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, which is sponsored by several philanthropic foundations and governments, is funding programs at 3 different centres. At one of them, the University of Queensland in Australia, researchers have already identified one possible candidate for a vaccine, although research is at a very early stage. Well, leading the vaccine team there is Paul Young, a professor of virology and head of the School of Chemistry at the University of Queensland. He says that they've been making very rapid progress.
We began our program of research, or at least vaccine search, the day that we received the information from China of the sequence of the virus. That was back in 11th of January. And within 3 weeks, we had gone through about 250 different versions of our particular approach to vaccine generation before we selected the lead candidate. So that lead candidate, which we're intending to take all the way through, is now already in preclinical animal studies to determine what immunity it can actually elicit in animals. And ultimately, we'll be testing that in other animal studies of disease to look at whether we can protect those animals. And with that, we will be moving into human clinical studies, phase 1 clinical studies, probably around about the end of June.
Now, we know that when it comes to, say, regular influenza flu vaccines, they're not 100% effective. It's difficult to get such a vaccine to work. Explain to us the challenges that you and the team are under to develop something for something like coronavirus.
Well, I think we're probably not under the same sort of challenges that vaccine manufacturers have with influenza, which drifts and changes quite dramatically from year to year, and that's why we need to make new vaccines each year. Coronaviruses don't mutate as rapidly as influenza, and so the vaccines we're designing and utilising now for this coronavirus is likely to last for quite some time and be effective. Many vaccines that are in use, apart from influenza, which has those problems, as I mentioned, have efficacy rates that are very high, that are in the 80 to 90% efficacy. So we've got absolute confidence that we'll be able to generate a vaccine that provides strong protection to the majority of those receiving it.
And I guess the million-dollar question is when? By when do you think?
Look, the rule book has gone out with regards to this outbreak. Obviously, people are trying to accelerate development as fast as they can. I'm sure you've heard many people comment before that the typical pathway for a vaccine it can be anything like 10 to 15 years. Many people have been talking about accelerating that to 12 months to 18 months. But we're even now starting to try and accelerate that given the scale of the outbreak. You may have heard overnight that one of the other groups funded by CEPI to advance a vaccine have already started their clinical trial. Their first human vaccinee has been vaccinated overnight. That's absolutely unheard of to have moved that quickly. They've moved into clinical studies before the preclinical work in animals have been completed, and that just shows the level of concern everyone has. From our own perspective, what we're considering doing is advancing manufacturing. So normally what happens is you wait till you determine whether your vaccine works effectively in your clinical studies, and it's only then you begin to ramp up the manufacturing for dissemination and deployment. We're starting to think about trying to get funding to advance manufacturing at the same time we're doing the preclinical and clinical studies, so that we will have a vaccine ready at scale when we know that it's past those clinical studies. So everyone's thinking of new ways of accelerating that pipeline.
Now, it may seem simple, but the main defense we have right now against catching the coronavirus is a good old-fashioned soap. Experts are urging us all to wash our hands and not touch our face as the main way of not catching the COVID-19. But what is it about the humble bar of soap that makes the virus simply collapse and slide away? And Professor of Chemistry Polly Thordarson is from the University of New South Wales, and he explained why soap is so effective.
Viruses, like everything else, like our own body, is just made out of chemicals. And in the case of the virus, it's the RNA, and it's wrapped around proteins, and they interact with each other in a what we call supramolecular chemistry fashion, a fairly weak interaction. And then you got this greasy lipid layer around the virus, and that's essential for the virus. So when you hit the virus with soap, the molecules in the soap are really similar to the ones in the lipid bilayer of the virus, and they start to exchange, and the soap molecules sort of pierce into the lipid layer and start to tear it apart, get into the virus, tear everything, all the connections apart between the protein units. And the soap also carries these things away in little bubbles we call micelles. So the virus essentially disintegrates and falls to pieces like a house of cards in the presence of soapy water.
What about hand sanitizers, which a lot of people have been somewhat panic buying? Are they any better because some of them contain some alcohol in it?
They are equally good. If you look at the advice from the World Health Organization, they recommend using soap or hand sanitizers. You should just use whatever you can get your hands on and you are comfortable with. The hand sanitizers work slightly differently. Yes, you need the ethanol is the active agent. It causes the virus basically to collapse. But they both do the job. And actually what's much more important is not what kind of soap you use or what kind of hand sanitizer, if it's ethanol based. It is how you apply it on a hand, because it doesn't matter if you got the fanciest, most expensive bacteria killing, and this is not a bacteria but a virus, soap or hand sanitizer. If you don't reach all the parts of your hand, you leave the virus behind. And this is also why there's no need for us to try to get any hospital-grade creams and chemicals. They need to deal with real bacteria and viruses, different viruses that are much more robust and you can't kill with soap. We're really lucky here, if you can call it luck. The coronavirus is a very fragile beast. It doesn't tolerate most cleaning chemicals for very long, including soap and hand sanitizer. So use what you can get. If you can't get the hand sanitizer, get soap. I would use both, just switch between them as you feel comfortable.
Such good advice there. It sounds so obvious, but wash your hands. You've been watching Newsday. I'm Kasia Madera in London.
And I'm Mariko in Singapore. Don't go away there because I'll be back with business news, and the financial markets here in Asia have started trading. We'll have the latest on how they're responding to that brutal fall on Wall Street.
We'll see you very soon for that, Mariko, but for the time being, thanks to everybody for watching Newsday.
Hello, the week started on a dry, fine, sunny note for many parts of England and Wales, and it really was a sparkler of a day, finishing with glorious colours in the sunset as captured here across Great Yarmouth. It wasn't like that everywhere because for Scotland, for Northern Ireland, after a decent start to Monday, so that weather front spread some clouds, some wind, some rain quite widely. Now that front drags its way a little bit further south, but you'll notice there's a kink in it, and that's going to be quite an important kink because it thickens the cloud after a bright enough start in Northern Ireland. The rain is soon in here, quite a bit of it as well, as you see, and then it spreads across a good part of mainland Scotland on into the afternoon, some of it getting across the border. Further south, wee bit of brightness. The southwesterly breeze will usher in some really mild airs, and if you get a wee bit of sunshine to the eastern side of the Pennines, East Anglia down towards the southeast, 13, 14, 15 could well be yours. A more showery regime across the northern and western Isles throughout the course of the day, and indeed on into the evening. Once that little wave is away on the weather front, that will allow it to relax its way ever further south. Slow progress, it has to be said, because it's running into an area of high pressure across Biscay and the near continent. So it's around and about on Wednesday across Wales, southern counties of England, the Midlands and East Anglia and Lincolnshire. Further north, much brighter skies, but that sunshine doing nothing for your temperatures. The last of Tuesday's really mild airs trapped there, particularly in the southeast, where again we could peak at around 14 or 15 degrees. Now from Wednesday on into Thursday, that weather front, more a band of cloud there rather than anything else at this stage for many southern counties. May just have enough about it for there to be a bit of rain down into this far southwestern quarter, but Wales, North Midlands northwards, increasingly sunny as you drift that wee bit further north, but again there's a chilly feel right across the piece. We are into single figures. A change today from Thursday to Friday, but the overall setup is very little changed, other than we might see a little bit more activity on that weather front across the southern counties of England, so the chance of some rain here and a noticeable easterly wind, so that'll make it feel fairly cool to say the least. Further north, at least you've got the benefit of the sunshine across the Midlands, much of Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland and the north of England, but again those temperatures are in single figures. The weekend brings us the prospect of mainly dry weather with some sunshine, feeling chilly, and there'll be some frosty nights too.
To know our world, we need to experience it.
Here we go again.
It's flowing seas.
The water is slowly coming up and about to engulf us. Wow.
The soil beneath your feet.
One of the best experiences of my travels.
The wind through your hair.
So much more power. That was incredible.
It's fiery frontiers.
It looks like one giant ferocious bonfire.
Explore every element.
Let's go.
Happy travel!
The Travel Show, Saturday at 10:30 on the BBC News Channel.
Download the BBC News app and never miss a story.
Get the headlines as they happen. Personalise your app for the stories that matter to you, and watch BBC News live wherever you are. Stay up to date whatever you're up to. Download the BBC News app.
Mizzling, spitting, pattering, plothering, mizzling again. To know what's coming, check the BBC Weather app.
Hello, welcome. I'm Kasia Madera with BBC World News. Our main story this hour. US stock markets have suffered their biggest one-day percentage fall since 1987 as the Trump administration issues new advice to try to curb the spread of coronavirus. The president has called on Americans to avoid groups of more than 10 people,